people will ever come to games, but I think all of them have gamed with us at some point. And so it does mean that usually when we will put out a call, we're trying to like aim for once a month, and not always succeeding at this point, frankly, which is like we're trying to work towards that. But when we want to fill a game, especially like a game with about a dozen people, it's pretty easy to do it and have a wait list of 5 or 10 people. So at the very least, like I think we are lucky in that we are rich in players, and then probably the next step is like consistency in getting more people who are good, or at least more people who are willing, or at least can be dragooned into organizing things, or teaching them how they can be organizers.
For my group, it actually, so I'm also a person who like cannot stop community organizing. That's just what I do. And I'm not also a person who just jumps into the deep end of everything that I do. So like I started role playing at Macalester College, and then a year later I was the president of the Gaming Society because I don't understand. I don't understand like limits. And so I actually, what happened is that I had been really interested in American Freeform and Nordic style and black box style for a while, but I hadn't really found people who actually cared about it. The only person, and then I moved to Durham, North Carolina, and I met Jason Morningstar there, and he was the only other person, we only knew each other, who cared about it. But then we went to New World Magiscola, and we met, like, randomly, like 10 people from Durham who we had no idea were there. And we're like, well, we're all into this, we all want to do this, well, we might actually have enough people to start something. And so that is kind of like, Jason, we were basically like, if we want to see this done, we're gonna have to do it ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so we just kind of, both Jason and I are very much like that kind of thing. We're just gonna start something and see where it goes. And so that's how we kind of started, out of our desire to get to play these games more, and also out of the desire of that we heard from others in New World Magiscola saying, this is the first time we've ever done anything like this. This is awesome. We want to continue doing this, and realizing that we had that interest. So even so, it was cool to go from like this big blockbuster thing that pulled people out of the woodwork and then bring it back to this small local scene that we didn't even know existed, or was just starting.
Didn't exist yet.
It didn't exist yet. There was nothing like that, but we had no idea that there were people with this interest other than like us hanging out.
It sounds like those people also didn't know they had that interest.
They were LARPers, but
had they been LARPing before? Like,
yes,
okay.
But they were people who are mostly actually from the Boffer community. And some of the and some white wool.
White wool?
White
Raise
wool.
your hand if you do Boffer. White wool.
Yeah, so they were people from those LARP communities mostly, so they hadn't really done this kind of LARP before.
Cool.
Kind of the same with me. To make a long story short, I got into LARP when I was doing book research. And for my book research, I went to Scandinavia, and I played in some G-Form games. And I was like, finally, I found like my home in the gaming community. Like, these are the kinds of games I would like to play. But there were not many people in my area making or running these games. And I wanted to play a lot more. I wanted to learn a lot more. I wanted to design. And so I have a kind of philosophy of, do the thing. We live in a duocracy, so do the thing. So I started gathering people with similar interests through a local convention in New Jersey, run by Amanel Bing and the Double Exposure folks, Dream Nation and DuxCon. I had a few Boffer friends, and like they came, and I facilitated my first game for them. And they weren't as into it, but now I have practice facilitating. So at the con, I think at the first con where I was facilitating games like this, I think I had maybe 4 or 5 games that I was going to run. I think only 2 of them recruited enough players. But the way it works with growing a community is things happen exponentially. So then at the next convention, instead of being one person, we were 3 people. And that because we were 3 people, we were able to run more games and be players in each other's games, and things kind of grew from there. So we went from 1 to 3, and then to more and more. I had 2 different local communities that I kind of created and helped curate there. One was not open to the public community, just of people I knew, and we would sometimes go away on the weekends and we would play games together. And then the other one was a more intentional public-facing community with a different set of friends. We formed a group called the Highland Park Players. We rented space in local churches and other places and drew players from around the kind of like the Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York corridor.
Okay. Cool. So those are your local groups, and you described a little bit about why you became organizers. I would like to know more about, the audience would also like to know more about how you curate those communities, and if you, you mentioned both open and closed communities. You were describing just sort of friends and friends and friends, and you talked about not having anyone around and just wanting an opportunity to play. So if you want to play, you need more people. But eventually, once it grows, presumably it starts to turn into an actual community. So how do you curate that, or kind of find a way to articulate a shared vision that you can build a community around that you can maybe get people to buy into? Or do you have one?
I think
about it.
I think there are lots of different methods for doing this. You could gather a group of people and have a collaborative process laying down the foundations of your community will be. I think it's important for local communities to have some sense of the shared values that they're embodying. I think it's most important to have that early on in the process. So I think that growing a local Larp community is just like making fermented pickles. I don't know how much you all know about pickles, but live pickles has
I don't know.
I wrote my master's thesis on pickles as a window into local culture. So pickles are really cool. Basically, there is bacteria on the surface of vegetables. When you place it in salty water in an anaerobic environment, the good bacteria begin to proliferate and eat through the sugars in the vegetables. They excrete lactic acid, and that's what pickles your delicious live pickle. Vinegar pickles are dead. We can talk about that later. But if you want your pickle culture to grow faster, you inoculate with whey, which is you just pour a little bit off the surface of another pickle jar, or like a little off the surface of some yogurt. And having that kind of injection of good bacteria at the beginning ensures that the good bacteria will make your pickles instead of the bad bacteria, which causes bad fermentation and your pickles to develop not always pleasant flavors.
Like sexist or racist flavors.
Like sexist or racist.
I think I'm following the metaphor.
Yeah, sorry. So to bring it back to Larp, whatever the kernel of the community you want to grow, you need it or something that kind of approximates it as close to the start of the community as possible, because the more people you have, the more that culture will get replicated. And as the culture gets bigger, you have to do less intentional work, and you can do more work based on herd competence, which is just this idea that if we are 10 seasoned LARPers and 2 new LARPers, we actually barely have to explain anything about LARP to the new LARPers. They're just going to intuitively get it from all of our behavior. If we have 10 new LARPers and 2 seasoned LARPers, that's a harder ratio to work with. So the old LARPers need to be more intentional about spreading good play culture. And I think that can also be extended to principles of community building. It's a very long answer. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's a good answer.
It was good. I have nothing about pickles. Sorry.
Do you mean
Um,
fermented liquors?
Yeah, fermented.
Yeah, so with our, if so, I don't have time to,
No,
okay. If, with our community, I'll do like a case study, I guess, of paperless. We really did set about to be very intentional, with our founding. Before we opened it up at all, we set and wrote a code of conduct. And we wrote, and it was mostly, about harassment and things like that, but also the values that we as a culture, Larp Shack have. So, that basically laying out, like, we are anti-homophobic, we are anti-shaming, we are a safe space. I can't remember everything, but basically putting, like, and also saying we are a, like, progressive, almost leftist type organization. So and we put that on our website, so people could see that. And when new players come in, we direct them to, everyone has to join our Facebook page before they can come to a LARP. And so it's right there, it's first thing, and we expect everyone to read that, and hopefully that will let people know if that is not something that they're interested in following. They probably shouldn't be coming to our space. We also laid out very quickly, like, I guess Jason and I are dictators at the moment, and we wanted to put all the responsibility on us if someone does need to be removed, but we are very willing to do that. We also originally started it out as a closed community, and we are just starting to open it. And the only way, we originally started with people we all knew and trusted, like, that they would follow what we wanted. And then what we are now doing is letting those people who are already in the community, if they know someone who they trust and we don't know, that's fine, because we trust them and we feel that they will hopefully bring in people that they trust. So it's kind of a chain of trust, exactly. But so it's definitely now reached people who we do not know, like, who come to Larp Shack and Jason and I have never met, but is not at the point in which we are, like, publicly advertising on banners at the public library or something like that, right? So that is, we're kind of a porous, closed group. We're talking about how we go open. We're not quite sure exactly how to do that. We feel like we've built enough of a really good culture in our center that we can handle this if we want to go open, but it does make us really nervous. I'm not going to lie. So
How will you decide if you want to completely open?
that will be a discussion with Jason and I will first decide if we feel comfortable with that, and then we will open that out to the rest of our group and be like, is this something that we want to do? Because we do also believe in, obviously, building that capacity and keeping them all in the direction they want the group to go.
Our group is in a very similar space and a big decision point. I should have said that my main co-organizers are James Stewart, and one of the things that we also have, like, close friends that we can discuss any of these decisions with, but one of the things that I think informs both James and I thinking about this is that his social group in college was the group on which the Document the Geek Social Fallacies was built. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but basically I think it's kind of it talks a lot about both often the generosity of spirit of including everyone, and like, so basically what kind of social rules that can lead to your group, the principle of, like, absolute inclusion overall. And so I think being very aware of that, and also I think both of us have led several types of geek communities in the past. We are trying not to repeat those sins. And so one of the things that we will do is kind of have absolute veto power. And anybody that we trust has sort of, at this point, absolute veto power over, and sometimes it is kind of like, this person explicitly did this thing or said this thing that makes us uncomfortable. Sometimes it's like, this person, I don't like playing with this person. They feel a little bit creepy to me, and since the types of play, like, Nordic style freeform games are often very emotionally intimate, anybody that kind of, like, gives us the whiff of, I'm not comfortable being kind of in an intimate space with this person, is probably not going to be a person that at this stage in our development seems like a positive addition. We are also talking about going open. I think there's like reasons for it, and I've been pulled to the side of agreeing with this, and we're going to do this thing, but I think it will also change the dynamic, and that there's going to be some games in which we might not be able to. So, like I mentioned that there's maybe friends of friends that have been allowed to come, but usually it's only people that we know have some discretion about who kind of will be a good player and gets the tone of the community. So we're aware of that, and I think that when we are potentially opening it up to people that could come in and will find us on the web, the advantage of that is growing the hobby and growing this specific form and increasing the accessibility of that, and that's all great. But also that means that there probably will be cases in which we either need to maybe stealthily remove somebody from the list, or tell them that they're not as welcome as, not necessarily welcome to these specific games or to any of our games, or maybe for the games, we might need to have that separate channel of games that are particularly vulnerable are not open games that everyone can play.
And that kind of goes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
We've got some questions too.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that kind of goes to also what you want to do when you're starting your local LARP community is you want to think about the labor that you will be giving yourself as an organizer further on down the road. Doing a lot of intensive hands-on curation of people is very emotional labor intensive. And I think one thing that makes a big difference in the longevity of a lot of these communities is how low the organizer burden is. And so having a closed
Compared to,
I think having a closed group is a lower organizer burden because you know exactly who your audience is. They've all kind of already been vetted. And you can just go ahead and run the event. When you open the group, then you get it. Then you maybe need more safety procedures for people to report things. You get the benefit of a big injection of new people potentially, and that's not to be underestimated. But if you want your community to last many, many years, you have to think very carefully about what kind of ongoing labor you are willing, how much ongoing labor you are willing to do. I mean, you got to be a real realist about that.
Have any of you tried or considered with closed LARP communities having occasional open events, so the controlled addition of fresh cucumbers, as it were?
We kind of did that. We had a festival of LARP in the International Festival of LARP from Shack. International, because we have one Canadian. And we did open that one up a little bit more. And it was a weekend long thing. And that brought in a lot of new people. A lot of them were from out of town, so that we already knew, so that wasn't great, super. But there were a lot of new players from other LARP communities that came in. And it worked pretty darn well, but they haven't come back because they're all involved in these other LARP communities that have monthly LARPs that they're already doing that take them away. But so we did do something like that, and we're planning on trying to do something similar to that next year. Jeff was at the International Festival of LARPs as well, and I think it was a good time. But thumbs up from Jeff. So we're kind of like that, so that we did kind of do that, and then we went. And those people, once they came though, and we liked them, they were welcome to come back to our closed group spaces, and we made sure they were hooked in. So we did do that.
I think it also depends a little bit on what kinds of games you're trying to build a community for. So I would play Ghost Court, which is a party game about, that's ridiculous, about ghosts and the people who sue them. I would play that game with anybody, pretty much. And then there's also this G-form game called Doubt, which is about monogamy and temptation in straight relationships, right? And I might not want to play that. I wouldn't want to play that game with a big open cattle call. So I think
that's going back to what I was saying about giving people veto power over the more intimate games.
Yeah.
even if the rest is slightly more open.
We have done a tiny bit of public outreach, but usually it's been for like bigger games, kind of like upwards of 15 people, where we need to fill a few people in, and then maybe we'll advertise to the Magiscola community or the New York City Larp meetup, and then like see who kind of filters in from there, like if we want to, or like if it seems like a good match.
So do you, let me just ask a follow-up question on that. Do you guys see a difference between I'm putting together in my head a relationship between the idea of curated communities versus individual curated games? And I know in my local LARP community, we talk a lot about curating games where like a subgroup of people decide this, they want to craft this experience with a set of people that are, for whatever reason, a good fit together for that kind of intimacy. But that can create bad feelings because like you're already in a community, so there's sort of like in and out group feelings going on, and does that gel at all with anybody?
So our community, like that's something we don't actually have had much experience with, because the way we run our community is a grab bag. Like we regularly don't have scheduled, like I think we run the International Festival of LARP, we did have more of a kind of some games scheduled. And I've run like one bigger scheduled game, but most of the time it's just like, these are a bunch of cool games. These are the teardrop lists. We use that from #feminism. We actually like list games and say like, this is light to as dark as possible. And then the group gets together and says, what are we feeling like playing right now? Are we feeling light? Are we gonna split? And some people want to play J Cheats the Pirate Life, and some of us, which is a very fun, silly game, or do some of us want to go and play, am I swearing this? And some of us want to go play Beach Fucker.
We have no idea if we're being recorded.
Okay,
so
so I'll just swear, cool. It's a good game. And that's a very dark game about like family dynamics and things like that. And we have just let people self-segregate into what they feel like playing. And it's for us, and even when we opened it up a little bit more, it worked. Like people were very good at kind of looking at themselves and going, oh, this is not actually something I feel comfortable with. I'm going to go here for these people I feel comfortable playing with. And we also always have a doors always open policy, and that has worked very well, that people have gone into a game and went, whoa, oh, never mind, this is not where I want to be, and have left. So we have not done that kind of curated experience.
And I think that's a really good point, that people also will self-filter themselves. So another great thing about having some public-facing events is that you have new people come and they'll kind of figure out if they want to be in the kind of community that's the kind of community that you're creating. And so, yeah, so sometimes you'll get a few people to stick that way. I also just wanted to mention the LARPs from the factory model, which is the LARP factories were groups in Oslo and Trondheim. They had a concept called the Limit, L-I-M-E-T, and that means glue in Norwegian. So they had kind of a committee of people who were the glue, and the job of the glue was to fix the space for one LARP per month. Having regular, we haven't talked about this yet, but having a regular meetup increases the chance of people joining your community. And whoever was willing to come and do the work could be part of the Limit. And then they recruited, and then as the Limit grew, they would gather the community together and they would vote on like which 12 LARPs are we putting out this year. And then each of those LARPs had open, open ticket calls, most of which would be filled by the local community, but a few of which would slots would often be filled by other random people who are maybe a couple degrees removed from the core organizing group.
I think understanding that not everything can be for everyone is highly consistent with the types of values of like players and people that we want in our community. So hopefully people do understand that there's just not enough capacity and that they'll be okay with that. And there's reasons for that. And so yes, we have curated for any number of reasons. Maybe we have an out of town guest that we particularly want to impress or like kind of make sure that they're going to have a great game. So we bring people that we know are going to be great at this type of game. We have a lot of people that are designers in the community. So if you want a specific playtesting experience, you might want people that you know are good playtesters. If you have things that deal with kind of like maybe specific social justice issues, like if you're writing a queer game and you want to, like we've done, looking at a queer game and we wanted to have both like primarily queer and primarily straight playtest groups, and so maybe we would select for something like that because that tells us different things about how the game works for different populations.
So I'm sorry, there was a question way back, and I wanted to come back to it, but we're still going.
Yeah, it's a little bit, just a little bit back. You all spoke about how to protect against kind of infringements in the community, but you can't always like make sure that doesn't happen. What systems do you have in place in these communities for corrective or like protective behavior? Like, do you throw the whole batch of pickles out? Do you try to introduce good bacteria so that you can save the pickles? Like, what?
Let me ask also, when you answer that question, and you want to jump in, also say like how large your community is, because I think that matters.
Yeah, so our community, I'll just start with that first. Our community, we have about, I think when I last checked, 95 people on our Facebook page who are technically members. Our regular like meetup, when we do it monthly, we usually get around 15 to 16 people. And that kind of changes in and out. But so that's kind of our standard regular play group is between 15 and 16 people.
That's the size of the group, or is it the same 15?
No.
Okay.
So like 90 people about in our pool.
Okay.
So with that question, like we're pretty new. We've only been around for goodness, I think we've done like 2 years now. Crazy. Wow, that's cool. Like, but we have set very strong wording that basically, if someone has a problem with someone, that they come and talk to myself or Jason, and they be confidential, and it will be our decision and our decision only, and we will take very quick action. We have had to do this once, in which we just actually, someone came to us and said, this player's play is making me feel uncomfortable. And luckily, and so I took that player aside and explained to them, like I didn't say who, but like this, your portrayal here is making this person uncomfortable. This is why. How can we work together to modify that? And luckily that player was their first ever this style of LARP. So they were kind of still like feeling their way, and they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that was going on. And they corrected. And we were like, oh, it worked. My God. So that was our first big test of that thing. I'm sure we'll get the more things, maybe. I hope not. I'm hoping we don't get any more in the future. But that's kind of our thing, is that it's up to us to, we're hoping that there are a few other people that we've started to talk to who are going to bring in to that process to kind of build capacity so that Jason and I don't have to be there all the time. So we have 3 other people who we're talking to right now who are going to kind of also take that role in for us and be part of the decision. But we don't really want it to be any bigger than 5 people, because we've seen groups in which everyone tries to do everything as a consensus, democracy, full automatic consensus, and explodes.
I think, so I've been involved with 2 different communities of about 20, and it was before a lot of this safety discussion happened. So we didn't have set procedures, and since the event was closed, it was more kind of by group feeling, and the setting makes a lot of difference. So if we are 15 people meeting up for a few hours in a space like this, the standard for behavior is a little lower compared to being, say, 15 people trapped in a vacation home somewhere, where it's hard to get away from somebody. In general, I prefer local communities where the participants are incentivized to work as much conflict out among themselves as possible, because again, that goes to reducing the burden on organizers. So you want to build capacity for that on a community level as well.
How do you incentivize your community members to work conflicts out?
So if somebody comes to me with a low-level conflict, your first question, I mean, not like, let's separate low levels of conflict from really serious transgressions, which need to be dealt with differently. But if, if person A and person B have a spat with each other and person A is complaining to me, then you can say, oh, well, have you talked to B about that? And you can have explicitly stated community goals of like the BFF rule, right? Giving other people the benefit of the doubt, understanding that we come from different perspectives and that there are, we can disagree, but still go have a milkshake afterward.
Do you think that's easier or harder based on the size of the community?
I think it's harder earlier on in the community because there's a tendency to turn to whoever the organization leaders are.
Yeah.
And so it's more important to push at the start also, because then instead of being one or two people with the power to negotiate conflict, suddenly you're 5, and that makes a huge difference in a group of that's only 15 or 20. And the community norms become self-reinforcing the larger the community gets. And so I think that also allows you to grow the community bigger, again, because the organizer labor is being kept low.
So I'm very confused on this, and it doesn't talk to the question, but can't I just run some games? Like, do I have
The
to?
question was, can't I just run some games?
Yeah, I just want to run some games. I just want to rent out a space, have people over, play games. All of this seems like a lot of emotional labor that I'm not honestly sure I'm the best person for.
Were you one of the folks who raised your hand when I said who wants to become a community organizer?
I like to run games. I like to see more local games. I like to see more small games, one shots.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that honestly, for me, it's actually not been a huge amount of emotional labor. One, I find a person to do it with you. Don't run it by yourself. Do a team. Please do a team. I also just think that the code of conduct, even if you're just getting a group of small players who you really trust, I really would do something like that. That's my opinion. I don't know. I mean, I guess it can be super casual, but if you want something that might actually happen on a regular basis, and kind of make it a thing, then I would probably think that would be a good idea. But I feel like, we've done it so that like we've not had to do that much emotional labor. We have two people, we will put a thing on Facebook saying, hey, we're gonna run some games. We got a space, people come, we run a game in the afternoon, all have dinner together, have a game in the evening, then go get drinks. That happens once a month.
Yeah, no, it's cool. So Liz has something to say.
Liz, sorry.
So I think, do what you want, do what works for you, be aware of, if you care about this sort of thing, be aware of who might be leaving on the outside. And I speak as, I think that I care a lot about these things because I've been left on the outside, or like had to claw my way into a bunch of different communities because these things were not accounted for. And just basically, I don't know, like sort of explicitly welcoming signals or just making sure that people understand that they're going to be safe, or maybe having a sort of handholding person that takes care of new people. Like, yeah, all of this is emotional labor. But there have been so many contexts in which I think that it's like some of it is gender stuff, some of it is age stuff, but like I've kind of walked into a room and walked right now. I'm a shy, introverted person, and if you, I think my entrance into gaming was really probably 10 years because I walked into my college gaming organization and it was a bunch of like 45-year-old men who stared at me, and I was kind of like, okay, this is not the space for me. And it was supposed to be a college organization, but there was no kind of like and you can't always control who your population is, but I think you can, having the space crowded by a certain type of person might implicitly not leave space for other people.
I'd also say, yeah, you totally can just rent some space and have some games. A lot of the stuff we're talking about, I think, can also be scaled to the size of community. Like if you're inviting 5 people to come play games with you, you do not need the same level of infrastructure as like a 100-person LARP community. But you might want to go ahead and build that capacity if you want the group to grow. And I think that some of this stuff is harder to implement later because if you implement it once your LARP community is already 100 people, then you have to teach 100 people to behave in a new way. Whereas since if people are continuously joining your community, then you have one person transmitting the values at first to 5 people, and then you have those 6 people transmitting it to the 2 newcomers, and so on and so forth as the organization gets larger.
I just want to attest, it is really hard to convey that stuff after the community's already been in place for decades. And like just pronouns, like just figuring out how to get, everyone wants to do a good job and it's just hard because it's not baked in and people feel bad and have fights about weird stuff. We don't want that, so. But yes, you can absolutely just run some games. The size of the community obviously affects that. Keep harping on that. Please.
Yeah, I'm curious about talking about the size of the community. It seems like there's some spaces where we have like a huge mailing list, a smaller group, a group that's exploring like continuous growth. And I think some of the power in this is there's something radical about talking about like being a community that that organizes grassroots like from the ground up. Is there a point at which in this philosophy you want to not exactly limit how big the community gets, but think about how to like when it gets to a certain point like make space for people to start up their own thing within it. And maybe you haven't reached that point yet because you don't need to get bigger than 15 yet, but like what are your thoughts on what happens when you get to that point and how to keep this sort of radical spirit of internal organizing, like resolving conflict within the group, et cetera, et cetera.
You did a better job asking the question than I did. So.
I have a lot of thoughts. One is that also new people and new organizers are the lifeblood of any community. So also designing for long-term success means designing for you to be replaced. So you want to, any opportunity you have to get other people facilitating games or organizing the logistics, like you should definitely do that. Because in a bottleneck community, right, if I start my own community and it's 10 people, and I'm the one at the head of it, and I'm the only one who knows how to organize stuff. If something happens to me, the community dies. And we don't want our communities to die. We want them to live on and spread. So I think that's one answer. The other thing is that these local LARP communities exist in a bigger ecosystem of LARP communities. There's one city can maybe support several local groups once you've built capacity. And ideally, I think you would want to be friends with the other local LARP groups in the area. Maybe you're catering to slightly different audiences or you're offering slightly different forms of game. So you can build kind of solidarity on the city level and then on maybe the state level or the national level. That would be something I would be very interested to see grow here in the States.
We're at the point where we need to do that, and we haven't yet, but I have some ideas, and a lot of it is just around sort of basic organizational tools that work for everything, sort of checklists and documentation for repeatability. And I think that, so as we kind of bring other people into the fold, so that we don't have to keep teaching the same lesson like over and over again, a simple list of like, make sure that you're covering all of these bases when you're planning for your event is probably going to be really useful. And maybe even a like, here's a manual of like kind of things that we suggest, our best practices. Here's a list of spaces that we know that we can run events and how much they cost. And so like hopefully we can hand as much of this off so that and like make it a living document so that other people can add to it as well. That like keeping all of that information in your head is both tempting, but like I forget stuff. I'm like I had to researched 7 spaces for an event I ran 2 months ago, and I kept some record of it, but some of it was like, I emailed 5 different places, and I'm like, what are your rates, and when do you open, and like, if I have to recreate that, I didn't do a good enough job of documenting that, I knew that, and maybe keeping in mind that somebody else might be looking at this document is a good way to get yourself organized.
One more question, and then I want to ask a totally different question. Cool.
Thank you. So I was taking a note of these notes. I'm thinking about all the community norms that you want to establish at the beginning and how they may not be identical from group to group, but there's like definitely some standards that we probably would agree on. Thinking about like all these Girl Scout meetings I've gone to where like I saw all these swear and there's like the Girl Scout code, right? That is holds up pretty well, right? Like it's like this is like stood the test of time. Do you think that there's room in the space to sort of eventually codify standards that aren't necessarily going to be like that each community isn't going to 100% use, but as like a toolbox where or here are like real good practices, pick the things that work for your group. So the work of the organizers isn't to like think up all the stuff themselves, but B, the cognitive load of something moving from group to group to group. It's like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. I've used that space for that toolbox exists, or is it should it really be done individually by each group?
I have many ideas about this. Well, I think I want to just frame that a little bit. There's multiple levels of answers to that question, and one of them is very straightforwardly answered by the blurb for this panel, which describes the local Larp Manifesto, which you should absolutely read because it kind of directly answers a high-level part of your question.
Right.
We spent a lot of time with that, like going back and forth and being like, this is a best practice that we want to share, and should we include this? And so
There's a companion post that has a lot of best practices in it.
Tips for starting a local community?
yes, tips for a local community.
I also think that you can consider carefully how much you want to codify things, especially in a small community, because we all know gamers, and there are some rules lawyers among us. And when you codify a social rule, then you can end up with a lot of argumentation, like I didn't specifically violate this, this rule exactly as it's written. And I think as an organizer of a small community, it's important to give yourself a little discretion to include people or exclude people. So I think it's good in general, it's good to have procedures, but you just want to be a little bit careful and think about where you're going to want the affordance of being able to do it.
Oh, okay, I was gonna say, I mean, like, there is a standard code of, I can't remember where it's from. Wait, I'll look it up. But there's actually like a standard code of conduct that we cribbed heavily from. I think it was from, it was Wisconsin, maybe? It wasn't Wisconsin. It wasn't Wisconsin. What? GeekGirlCon. We cribbed their code of conduct. And I think that's a totally like legitimate thing to do. So there are these like good, Wisconsin is another one, that have these great codes of conduct that you can use and grab to kind of lessen your cognitive overload, because we didn't want to write one from scratch. And we actually tried to do this, that we tried to we were talking to a bunch of other people like Lizzie and some people in Minnesota who had done this kind of community before we created ours. And we saw like a few of them have a huge amount of documentation, just a massive amount. And we were like, no way. We felt like a community our size didn't need that level of documentation and bureaucracy and things like that. And so I think that I would agree with Lizzie, I guess, that like there are resources out there for you to use kind of already, and that you don't want to, you want these foundational things for the culture, but you don't want to add on all of these extra layers from the beginning, because that's just going to add to your load and weigh things down.
It might also like scare people off.
Yeah, like this other one had like 3 or 4 committees, including like an outreach committee and this committee. And we were like, ooh, it's working for them, God bless. But
for one of the events that led to this safety roster to grow about 4 times in size, I totally understand why a lot of those things were there. Like, hopefully those are things that you never encounter until your community approaches like 900 people in size. And yeah, I think that keeping it attuned to the size of your group is really important.
Also, weeding out people for lower level offenses or reasons maybe helps prevent you from having to deal with the organizer nightmares, like allegations of sexual violence, for example.
On that happy note, and quite timely, we do need to spend a couple minutes talking about gender, because this is ladies leading Locavore Larp communities. I'm not sure how any of you individually feel about the label ladies.
Yeah, I'm
We're
sorry.
gonna blame Kate for that.
We're gonna blame Kate for that. We had a conversation about this and how and it was
We agreed to blame Kate, and moving on. No, I'm sorry, I'm trolling Kate.
I can take it.
I had that sense. We're going with the assumption that everyone who's a panelist here on to some degree identifies as or is female identified or adjacent, and in some way that has affected your experience in the LARP communities that you organize. So I want to ask first, how, if at all, do you think that has shaped the way that you organize or presented challenges to you as an organizer?
So I'm not maybe identified in some very this complicated sphere, but I recognize that I'm usually read as a woman, and I'm politically affiliated with women and all of that stuff. But I mean, I think one of the most important things was meeting you. You are my entryway to this, and sometimes I joke that it's my larger learning community is the House of Stark, actually having I mean, I think that almost all of the groups that I have been involved with are close to parity or have more women, and I'm just honestly more comfortable in that space. I find it sort of easier to, because a lot of stuff has gone on and we've all been through a lot of stuff, I find it sort of easier to trust women, and so just having that be kind of a strong presence and being aware of that, I just kind of might make me feel that a woman-led community might be more likely to have my back, or at least not sort of have to deal with just kind of residual either doubting or questioning of competency, or things that I am much more likely to get in spaces that are either explicitly led by men or dominated by men. This is all hardly binary. I don't even necessarily think in this way. So that's why this is why I'm sort of a little bit uncomfortable with this, because no. Actually, you're hearing me have a meltdown right now, because it is confusing, because it is a thing that is both kind of actually real and has had a difference in my life, and also I think in some ways because of that, my current community is less oriented towards that. We have so many queer and non-binary people, and I think, but at the same time, I think that we probably have some of that because we were led into a space that was reasonably diverse at both, in gender, not as racially diverse as in my life, but has and a decent number of some age diversity, different people coming from different spaces, people coming from different parts of the country and the world to New York City. So all of those are things that I think have led to it being a space where you can accidentally have gender parity or something close to it. And so I don't want to discredit the importance of that as kind of a foundation stone. It's more that I think it doesn't necessarily shape the way that I think about how it works on a day-to-day basis.
Although it affected your start time in terms of your timeline of when to start LARPing again.
Sure, yeah.
Because that first group encounter that you had with all of the 45-year-old men in the college group. No, so. Okay. Do either of you think that gender or perceived gender affects how you organize LARP or your experience of being a LARP organizer? Either challenges or inspirations there?
I think in one way around emotional labor. So I think that women and non-binary people are more likely to come to me when there's a problem in the group management. And so I end up doing more emotional labor, or I end up doing a lot of emotional labor often. for that community. Yeah, so I think it's affected me in that way.
I think that for me, I have not actually felt like it's affected me a huge amount in my current group. But it has also, again, just been a thing in the back of my mind as I've designed things to make sure it doesn't do that. So another group that I was involved in, there were women who were in it, but there was also one man, and that man, I have noticed this over and over again, of the man or the person who's identifying as masculine, becoming the figurehead, and the work of the women and the non-binary folks gets erased and kind of buried underneath that, even though they're the one often doing a lot of the heart of the work. And so I think that's something that I've been incredibly cognizant of. That happened to me at my college, in which I was the president of the gaming society, but that there were people who were, that role was not as, my role was kind of diminished, and some more masculine presenting people and men kind of took over and became kind of the face of the hotness in that group, right? Even though we were doing all the emotional labor and that kind of thing. So it's a thing that I'm very cognizant of when I created this group, and luckily the person who I'm working with is also amazing and super cognizant of that. And so we were very focused, because, and I listen, we were very focused on, because the person who I'm doing this with is Jason Morningstar, and he is incredibly famous in my mind among the Larp community, and I'm not. And so, like, there was
to my next question, which is how can male identified community members best support your efforts?
Right. So yeah, basically, like, he did a great, like, we worked really closely together, and we are very cognizant of both having our, even though his voice, because of his status as a designer, honestly, was a bigger voice than mine, we've been very cognizant of pushing our voices equally. And whenever we talk about our group, we'll say, well, I'm one of the runners, and this is the other runner, and we're equal in that. And we will both make posts and things like that. We're just very focused on that. And I think because of those experiences that we both had and realized about power dynamics and gender and things like that, that has made us really focused on it. So that's something that I would say is shaping.
I think it's also possible to overcorrect just a little bit. Like the non-male identifying organizer should be given slightly more credit than they deserve, possibly. And I've also noticed that the people who do the speaking, like the public speaking part at LARP events, often more credit gets attributed to them, regardless of whatever labor they did backstage. So I think it's important to try to keep that at least some semblance of equal.
Did you have? I guess I wanted to quickly speak to. I had like the question of kind of what people can do. I always kind of more represented population should listen to less represented populations, try their best to understand what is needed, and even if they don't quite get why, do it anyway, and make a practice of that. And I think it also in regards to it's like I will. It is try to, and this goes in like any circle, like any direction of oppression, try to put more effort towards like I think overcoming those boundaries for people that are not making it into a group for whatever reason. It is going to take more effort and more emotional labor
And noticing it in the first place.
Yeah, exactly right. So, and I think also like asking questions that you might not need to ask, like maybe like throwing in is there something that I'm forgetting, or like taking more time to, I think, like one of my co-organizer, but sometimes he maybe drops things more quickly than other people, and so kind of doing the thing where it's like we're going to put in a roundup that reiterates like the time and place of the meeting, and like checks in on people and like make sure, hey, maybe we can talk about like this thing going on, or whatever. Like the kinds of types of care that might be needed by somebody who are not you. I think about all of the types of somebody who are not you and try to integrate that.
James, this organizer, do you think that you have different, that gender affects your organizing styles at all when they come into play? This is just personality.
I think that all sorts of things affect our organization. Like, we've run like sort of like 3 or 4 groups of different kinds in a row together. So it's like we both have a shorthand, and also like there's specific things about each other that drive us insane, and like, but also things that we know work well, so we understand our relationship.
Did you know that we started an all James, everybody's James, so just we should tell him everybody is James. Sorry,
Oh
not
gosh.
okay.
Now I'm triggered.
Sorry, I'll work with it. There's a sanctuary running. No there. I will bring this.
Was this like everyone is John?
Except it's James.
But do you know what I'm talking about?
No, we're not going to sidetrack, but I apologize for trolling.
Very good.
You had your hand up before.
This actually is a good moment to illustrate this element of one aspect of growing a group is not being certain of sort of the sort of knowledge within the domain, so to speak, and how to address that as sort of an organizational figure or just people who are in that. So that can include knowing like terms like PvP, PvE, using the name of a game as a shorthand, using the name of a designer as a shorthand, and then try how to invite the sharing and sort of somewhat universality of that knowledge without assuming that, oh, you must not know.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
how do people find that
that's nodded
balance?
to in the local Larp Manifesto, actually.
Yeah.
Not using jargon, using simple language to describe things.
On the topic of gender dynamics and organizing, I wanted to share a vision that I have in my mind, that a visual memory, in fact, of glancing quickly at the dorm assignments for Event Horizon. This is a shout out to the organizer of Event Horizon, the owners and creators of which were all non-primary. There are 3 dorm sets at Event Horizon, at the Blockbuster Weekend Larp. There's a men's dorm and a women's dorm, and a non-binary gender neutral dorm. The lists of people assigned to those 3 sets of spaces were of equal length. Cool. And as a non-binary person, that was tremendously comforting to me in ways that I did not consider.
Don't make me cry. Okay. Yes.
I also think when organizing and talking about gender, it's important to acknowledge that socialization and normalization are real, and even if I don't particularly identify as male, other people are probably going to socialize as males and attribute things to me. And that's not my fault, but it's also not something I get to do. So doesn't have to
Complicated.
doesn't have to be that the person who identifies as male. If they are treated as male, you need to be aware of that. I give you more of that. And that sucks.
But being aware of it is totally awesome. Oh, you're holding a thing. Do we have any other audience questions, or should I ask another question? One more.
I have no idea. I'm in a room.
We've got 4 minutes left.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask.
I could have a question.
I'm not fishing for questions, but I want to make sure that we have time to hear audience questions. I did want to just open a spot for advice, just generally for starting Larp communities like this, especially as relates to female-identified folks who might be having a hard time. Do you have any other ideas along those lines that you want to share before we go and we'll have
Listen to my backstory podcast where I talk about this for an hour or something like that. Cave Hill, it's there. I can't say it in 4 minutes, but I've got a lot of stuff there. Check it out.
advice from Cave Hill?
That's pretty much what the panel that was about. Yeah.
I'd say envision yourself in 5 years when you have burnout from organizing this and from doing emotional labor for this community, and think about what you can do now to avoid ending up to avoid ending up in that position. So systematize like your social norms and make sure that emotional labor, especially, is distributed to many, many people.
Lizzie's blog, Leaving the Day, has some really good stuff on that, which I read before I started.
Yeah, and like dovetailing with that, I think there might be more things that have already been built than you might think, and that includes like looking for advice, but also kind of asking people if you're not certain about something, or you're like, oh man, do I have to build this thing? Like maybe ask people that have already done that. And like just as an example, I think it kind of I think a lot of people keep a list of like, I have like a 4-page list of my favorite games, and people are like, oh, where do I find things? And I was like, oh, well, this is a document that I prepared to give precisely to people like you in this situation.
People might want from this. That's the impression that I get.
And so come to me and I will send it to you. I'm not, it's my very idiosyncratic like favorite things, but like sometimes people don't have that to start with, and then you can see it.
Okay. Did we miss anything? Are there perspectives that this panel is missing that are important to this conversation? Shout it out now or catch us later.
I want to say that there's something about like what you're trying to do here that's like that has a radically anti-capitalist point of view, and I wanted to make sure that we like consider that and we think about why we're doing this. If we want to do this kind of thing, that's part of it, and we can bring that into the conversation. We'll talk about it later.
Because it actually, yes, totally is.
Yes.
My part.
I actually do have something, sort of on the networking side of things. When you said you started your game because you went to New World and had a scholar. I'm a Bostonian. I had no idea that there was something local. How do you find these people? Like, how do you find people to talk to, like, even to network with if you're starting your own thing? Like, how do you get started on that front?
You're here at Living Games. That's a good
Sort of,
start.
you know,
Yeah.
I'm showing up to events like this. But
Go to the place where the friendly nerds are. Like, yeah, I mean, I think inviting your friends, so often you can get friends into it. I should also specify, I do not currently have a community here in Boston, but if someone else organized one, I would totally show up to events. But find your friends, and it's okay to start really small, to be 2 people instead of 1 person. I mean, you've doubled your capacity right there.
Go to find your local gaming, even like Living Games or some even smaller conventions that don't have the price, that are a little less expensive. You can go.
Intercon would be a great place to go here in Boston.
Boston.
Yeah.
Boston.
Providence, but it's from Boston.
It's at the Larp shed.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Any last comments? Because it's 2 o'clock.
No, so we should probably close that. We should have some questions.
These are your Locavore Larp organizers. Please come and find them. Good luck.